I always felt a flutter of nerves whenever we visited David's family. It wasn't that they weren't welcoming, far from it. David's parents, Martha and George, were the epitome of warmth, and his brother Mike could always be counted on for a good laugh. But then there was Laura, Mike's wife, the proverbial thorn in my side. As David and I drove to his parents' house for the usual Sunday dinner, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. "David, are you sure it's okay that I come along today? I don't want to create any tension, especially with Laura around." David glanced at me, his eyes softening. "Chloe, your family. They all adore you. As for Laura, just try to ignore her snide remarks, okay?" I nodded, trying to brush aside the unease. David parked the car, and we made our way to the front door, greeted by the familiar, comforting aroma of roast beef and homemade apple pie. As we entered, Martha's face lit up. "Chloe, David, you're here. Come in, come in." George followed suit, his hearty laugh filling the room as he enveloped us in bear hugs. "How's my favorite daughter-in-law and soon-to-be lawyer?" Before I could reply, Mike bounded over, his usual playful self. "Hey, sis, ready for another round of family madness?" I laughed, the tension easing a bit. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then, from the living room, Laura's voice cut through the air, tinged with her typical mix of indifference and sarcasm. "Oh, look, the happy couple finally graces us with their presence." I forced a smile, meeting her gaze. "Hi, Laura, good to see you too." Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed easily at first, everyone catching up on the week's events. Laura, however, seemed to be in a particularly prickly mood. "So, Chloe, still trying to play house with David? I mean, with your career and all, isn't that a bit too traditional for you?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. I took a deep breath. "Well, Laura, we all make choices that suit us best. I believe in balancing career and family." Laura snorted. "Balancing, right. As if having kids doesn't totally derail your life." Mike, trying to diffuse the tension, chimed in with a chuckle. "Oh, come on, Laura, a little niece or nephew would be a joy, wouldn't it?" Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. "Joy? More like a lifetime of hassle. But hey, if Chloe wants to pop out a few kids and live the suburban dream, who am I to judge?" I could feel the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. George, ever the peacemaker, attempted to steer the conversation elsewhere. "So, David, how's that new project going at work? You were telling me about it last week." David launched into a description of his latest venture, but I could barely focus. Laura's comments had struck a nerve, and I spent the rest of the meal in a daze. It was a cool autumn evening, and the family had gathered at Martha and George's for dinner. This time, the air was filled with an extra buzz of excitement. David and I had a special announcement to make, and I was both nervous and thrilled. As we sat around the dinner table laden with Martha's famous pot roast and mashed potatoes, I exchanged a glance with David. He gave me an encouraging nod. It was now or never. Everyone, we have some news," I began, my voice slightly trembling. All eyes turned to us. Martha leaned forward, her expression expectant. "What is it, dear?" David took my hand, beaming. "We're expecting a baby." There was a moment of stunned silence, then the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Martha and George were beaming. "Oh, my goodness! That's wonderful news!" Martha exclaimed, getting up to hug us. George clapped David on the back. "Congratulations, son. I'm so proud of you both." Mike hooped, his grin wide. "I'm going to be an uncle. That's awesome." Amidst the joy and excitement, Laura sat back, a smirk playing on her lips. "A baby, huh? Well, that's going to be a handful. Good luck with that." Her tone was laced with condescension, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too happy. Martha frowned at Laura's comment. Laura, dear, it's a joyous occasion. Laura shrugged, nonchalantly picking at her food. Sure, joyous. Until the sleepless nights and diaper changes kick in. Mike, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Oh, Laura, don't be such a pessimist. It's going to be great, right, Chloe? I smiled, determined to keep the atmosphere positive. Absolutely, Mike. We're really excited. The conversation eventually moved on, but Laura's words lingered in my mind. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension amidst my happiness. As the evening wound down, George raised his glass for a toast. To David and Chloe, and the new addition to our family. Glasses clinked, and everyone echoed, to David and Chloe. These words warmed my heart. Despite Laura's attitude, our joy couldn't be dampened. This was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and nothing was going to take that away from us. The excitement of our announcement soon gave way to the harsh realities of pregnancy. My mornings, afternoons, and evenings became a nauseating roller coaster. I could hardly keep anything down, and even the smell of my once favorite foods made my stomach churn. During one of these tough days, David and I were at his parents' for dinner again. I was trying to nibble on some toast, my only safe food these days. David was rubbing my back, trying to comfort me. Chloe, you sure you don't want to try some soup? Mom made it just how you like it, David suggested gently. I shook my head weakly. No, thanks, David. Just the smell is making me queasy. Martha looked at me with concern. Poor dear, this pregnancy seems to be really taking a toll on you. Laura, who had been watching with a disinterested look, chimed in with her usual lack of empathy. Well, what did you expect, Chloe? Pregnancy isn't a walk in the park. You wanted a baby, so now deal with it. I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. David's expression hardened. Laura, that's enough. Can't you see she's struggling? Laura rolled her eyes. Oh please, David. I'm just stating the facts. She should have thought about this before. George, trying to defuse the situation, interjected. Laura, let's keep the dinner pleasant, please. Mike, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his tone a mix of annoyance and concern. Laura, can't you just lay off for once? Chloe's doing her best. Laura scoffed, pushing her chair back. I'm just being realistic. You all are just babying her. In my opinion, she's just overreacting. It's just a little morning sickness. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the stress and hormones getting the better of me. David stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. That's it. We're leaving. Chloe doesn't need this right now. As David helped me up, Martha came over, her eyes filled with apology. I'm so sorry, Chloe. Don't mind Laura, dear. We said our goodbyes quickly, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness as we left. The car ride home was quiet, the tension from dinner lingering in the air. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off Laura's words. They echoed in my mind, amplifying my fears and insecurities. But deep down, I knew I had to stay strong, for the sake of our baby. The day finally arrived when David and I welcomed our son, Ethan, into the world. It was a moment of pure joy, overshadowing all the hardships of the past months. We decided to introduce Ethan to the family at Martha and George's place, a neutral ground where everyone could share our happiness. As we entered the house, Ethan cradled in my arms, the family's reactions were everything I hoped for. Martha's eyes lit up, and George's broad smile was like a beacon of warmth. Mike was practically bouncing with excitement. Oh, my stars, he's just perfect. Martha cooed, gently touching Ethan's tiny hand. George leaned in, his voice gentle. Welcome to the world, little fella. Mike was next, his voice full of awe. Hey there, little guy. I'm your Uncle Mike. Ready to cause some trouble together? Their reactions filled my heart to the brim. But then, there was Laura. She hung back, a sour expression on her face. When she finally approached, her words were like a cold splash of water. Well, that's a baby, all right. Kinda looks a bit weird, though. All red and wrinkly. The room went silent. Martha's face turned into a frown, and George's eyes narrowed. David's arm instinctively tightened around me. Excuse me? Martha said, her tone icy. What did you just say about my grandson? Laura shrugged, her voice dripping with disdain. I'm just saying, he's not exactly cute, is he? Looks kind of scary to me. I felt a sting at her words, and David stepped in, his voice tight. That's enough, Laura. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Mike looked at Laura, disbelief written all over his face. Laura, what's wrong with you? That's your nephew. Laura rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Everyone's thinking it, I'm just the only one saying it. Martha stepped closer to Laura, her eyes flashing. Your behavior is disgusting, Laura. If you can't be happy for Chloe and David, maybe you should leave. Laura scoffed, crossing her arms. Fine. If I'm not welcome, then I'll go. But don't expect me to fawn over a baby like everyone else. With that, she stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of shock and discomfort behind her. The joyous atmosphere had been tainted, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. A few months had passed since Ethan's introduction to the family, and things had been relatively calm. David and I were adjusting to parenthood, albeit with the usual sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. That sense of normalcy was shattered one afternoon when Laura unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep. I opened the door to find her standing there, an odd, frantic look in her eyes. Laura? What are you doing here? I asked, surprised. Chloe, I need a favor, a big one. She blurted out, her voice tinged with desperation. I was wary but curious. Okay, what is it? She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around. I need to borrow Ethan. Just for a little while. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Borrow Ethan? What on earth for? She began pacing, speaking rapidly. It's my grandmother, see? She's old, doesn't have much time left. She told me she's leaving most of her estate to the first grandchild who has a baby. I thought maybe I could pass Ethan off as mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want to pretend my son is yours? Are you insane? Laura stopped pacing, turning to face me. It's just for a day, Chloe. My grandmother's not all there anymore. She won't know the difference. Anger bubbled up inside me. You want to deceive your dying grandmother with my child? That's sick, Laura. She clenched her fists, her voice rising. You don't understand, Chloe. This could change my life. It's a lot of money we're talking about. I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling. I don't care how much money it is. I'm not going to help you lie, especially not with my baby. Laura's face contorted with frustration. You're being selfish, Chloe. You have no idea what I'm going through. I stood my ground, my voice firm. And you have no idea what being a mother means. The answer is no, Laura. Now, I think you should leave. She glared at me, her body tense. You're going to regret this, Chloe. You just wait and see. With that, Laura stormed off, leaving me standing there, shocked and shaking. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. The audacity of her request was beyond comprehension. I knew then that Laura was capable of going to extreme lengths for her own benefit, and that realization chilled me to the bone. I called David immediately, recounting the bizarre encounter. He was just as shocked and angry as I was. She's lost it, Chloe. Just stay away from her, okay? I don't want her anywhere near you or Ethan. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I will. It's too much. After hanging up, I went to check on Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his crib, blissfully unaware of the insanity of the world around him. I promised myself then and there that I would protect him from any harm, no matter what. Laura's bizarre request had opened my eyes to the lengths she would go to, and I knew I had to be vigilant. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and Ethan was taking his nap in his nursery upstairs. I was in the kitchen, trying to catch up on some chores, when the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a delivery of baby supplies I had ordered online. The exchange took less than a minute. But when I returned inside and headed upstairs to check on Ethan, my heart dropped to my stomach. The crib was empty. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through me. Ethan! Ethan! I called out, my voice trembling as I frantically searched the room. There was no response, no sign of him anywhere. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed David's number. David, Ethan's gone. He's not in his crib, he's not anywhere. I cried out as soon as he answered. What? What do you mean gone? Are you sure he's not somewhere in the house? David's voice was laced with panic. I've looked everywhere. He's not here, David. Someone took him. I was on the verge of hysteria. David's voice was firm, trying to stay calm for both of us. Okay, Chloe, call the police right now. I'm leaving the office, I'll be there as soon as I can. I hung up and dialed 911, my voice breaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet neighborhood. As the officers began their investigation, David rushed in, his face pale with fear. Chloe, tell me everything. What happened? I recounted the events, from the courier's visit to the chilling discovery of Ethan's empty crib. As I spoke, a horrible thought struck me. Laura, she threatened me, after I refused to let her take Ethan. David's face hardened. I'll kill her if she's done anything to him. The police overheard and immediately took note. We need to know everything about this Laura. Address, description, everything, one of the officers said. As we provided Laura's details, Martha and George arrived, faces etched with worry. Martha embraced me, her own tears mingling with mine. Just then, Mike burst through the door, his eyes wild with worry. What's going on? I heard Ethan's missing. Before we could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. It's Laura. He answered, his voice shaking. Laura, where are you? Do you know anything about Ethan? The room fell silent, everyone's eyes on Mike. He listened for a moment, his expression turning from worry to shock and then to anger. You did what? Laura, how could you? He hung up, his body trembling with rage. She took him. She's at her grandmother's, trying to pass Ethan off as her own. The police officer sprang into action, coordinating with their team to track Laura down. David held me close, his body rigid with anger and fear. David, Mike, and I were in a state of high alert as we drove to Laura's grandmother's house. The tension in the car was palpable, each of us lost in our own turmoil of anger and worry. As we approached the house, my heart pounded against my chest, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Mike was on his phone, coordinating with the police. They're on their way. We just need to keep her there until they arrive. We pulled up to the house, and without a second thought, we rushed inside. The scene that greeted us was surreal. Laura was there, holding Ethan in her arms, cooing at him as if he were her own. Her grandmother, a frail, confused-looking woman, was watching them with a faint smile. The moment Laura saw us, her face went white. What are you doing here? she stammered, clutching Ethan closer. "Give me my son, Laura," I shouted, my voice filled with a mixture of rage and relief at seeing Ethan. David was right beside me, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "You're done, Laura. The police are on their way." Laura's grandmother looked around, confusion written all over her face. "What's going on? Laura, who are these people?" Before Laura could respond, Mike stepped forward, his voice filled with disgust. "These are Ethan's real parents, Grandma." Laura took him, pretending he was hers. The old woman's eyes widened in shock. "What? Laura, is this true?" Laura's facade finally crumbled. Tears started streaming down her face. "I just wanted the inheritance, Grandma. I didn't think it would go this far." Her grandmother shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. "Laura, how could you? This is unforgivable." By now, Ethan had started to fuss, sensing the tension. I reached out, and Laura, defeated, handed him over to me. Holding Ethan close, feeling his warmth and hearing his familiar sounds, was the most comforting feeling in the world after the terror of the last few hours. "You're sick, Laura," David said, his voice cold. "You need help." Laura was sobbing now, her body shaking. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Just then, the police arrived, their presence filling the room. They immediately went to Laura, reading her rights as they handcuffed her. As we left Laura's grandmother's house, the police leading Laura away, a wave of relief washed over me. Ethan was safe in my arms, unharmed by the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, our lives were a whirlwind of police statements and court dates. The reality of what Laura had done was sinking in, not just for us, but for the entire family. David and I were sitting in the living room one evening after putting Ethan to bed, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. David finally broke the silence. "Chloe, I can't believe she's actually going to jail for this." I nodded, still processing everything. "I know. It's just, I feel so betrayed, David. She was family." David reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "She crossed a line, Chloe. What she did was unforgivable. But we need to focus on moving forward, for Ethan's sake." The trial had been swift. Laura's actions were indefensible, and she was sentenced to several years in prison for kidnapping. Mike had filed for divorce, a decision that had shaken him deeply. A few days later, we were at Martha and George's house. The family had gathered, a sense of somber unity in the air. Martha was the first to speak as we all sat in the living room. "I just can't believe she would do something like this. To her own family," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. George nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's a hard pill to swallow. But we have to think about the kids now, about Ethan." Mike sat quietly, his eyes distant. I feel like I didn't know her at all. How could I have been so blind?" David put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, Mike. None of us could." The conversation turned to how we could all support each other. It was clear that the family bond had been tested, but not broken. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Ethan was growing fast, his smiles and laughter a constant reminder of the joy he brought into our lives. The ordeal with Laura had left its mark, but it had also made us stronger, more appreciative of the love and support we had for each other. One evening, as I watched Ethan play, I realized that this experience had taught me about the resilience of family, the strength of love, and the power of moving forward, no matter how difficult the past might have been. We had faced our darkest hour, but we had emerged stronger, united by our love for each other and for our son. The future was uncertain, but I knew that as long as we were together, we could face anything.